Hey everyone, this is Nick, and I've been using Linux since 2006, and back then things were a bit different. Ubuntu was the new kid on the block. We had just started catching up to Windows and macOS in terms of user-friendliness and features, and basically daily driving Linux was reserved to geeks and nerds like I was and like I still am. Since then, the Linux desktop has grown and matured and caught up to Windows and macOS, and even in some areas it has surpassed them. But it's still not mainstream. There are clear signs though that Linux is starting to get more mainstream appeal, and one of the main drivers behind that is gaming. But can gaming alone help put Linux in the spotlight? All I know is that I'm going to put today's sponsor in the spotlight to help you get your internet connection in check and make sure it only does what you want it to do. This video is sponsored by Safing. They make the Port Master, which is an amazing tool that lets you control and monitor your internet connection with a simple graphical user interface. You get block lists, you get profiles depending on your current connection, and you can even tweak settings per app. It's also completely open source and free. Safing also makes the SPN, or Safing Privacy Network. It's a powerful VPN alternative which spreads your connections across the globe instead of rerouting all your connections to only one server. With the SPN, you can be everywhere at once, and no website can build a profile from your visits and your location. Of course, you also get all the benefits from a traditional VPN. If that's something you'd like to try, and if you want to help support Safing's open source work, you can subscribe to the SPN right now, or download the Portmaster by heading in the link in the description below. So, Linux gaming, the final frontier. Or at least it was the final frontier, now it's more of a well-trodden path. Linux gaming used to be only a hack. You had to use Wine to run Steam or any boxed game. It worked on about 5% of the Windows library, it was unstable, it performed terribly in most cases, and native Linux games were almost non-existent. WineAppDB was your only source to know if something was playable or not, and that website wasn't, and still isn't, the most user-friendly thing you can come across. We had plenty of open source titles, some of them being really amazing, but if you wanted to play a Windows game, you had to set your sights on games that had been released years ago. No day one gaming for us Linux nerds. And then the holy Gaben came and gave us native Steam and Steam machines. And these failed. Hard. Even with native Steam, the native Linux ports were not the most frequent thing ever. It started a trend, sure, but it definitely wasn't fantastic. Steam machines were supposed to be the spearhead of that effort, to let Valve not depend on Windows anymore, and not risk losing market share to the Windows Store. It was basically an effort to make Steam its own platform, the gaming platform for PC, while Microsoft wanted the Windows Store to be the exact same thing. Both ambitions really fell flat, as the Steam machines never really picked up any steam. And the Windows Store is just now starting to be a place where you might want to go to download something that you actually would want to run. Valve then changed gears and introduced SteamPlay and Proton, with the results we know today. We have 54% of the top 100 Steam games running perfectly on Linux, and 41% of the top 1000, at least according to protonDB. We have day one support for a ton of new releases, and games that don't work on day one generally work after a week. Even anti-cheat is no longer the issue it once was, with major players adding support for Proton and Linux to their updates and builds. And that trend is only going to get stronger with time. Steam machines fell flat, probably because Valve let all their hardware partners endorse all the risk from manufacturing, selling, distributing those things, and so it just never picked up. But they had the right idea. Hardware is what drives people to use software. Good hardware is what people buy, and then they use what ships by default, so your software is dependent on the hardware that it runs on. Provided your software is actually good enough, which it wasn't when Steam machines released. There is no operating system market. People do not go and buy operating systems or download operating systems. They buy hardware that comes with an OS pre-installed, and that is what they're going to use on that hardware. Sure, some people will try other things. Our community is proof of that. But the vast majority of people, they're going to stick with what came in the box. And that's where the Steam Deck came. It runs Linux out of the box. It runs a ton of games. It's appealing hardware that fills a niche that just doesn't have competition yet, at least not at that price point. And it's got backing from one of the biggest gaming companies. And the Steam Deck is a prime driver to help Linux grow, not only in the gaming space, but with a halo effect. No gaming pun intended. It can also drive growth for the Linux desktop itself. See, users like the stuff they own. They get attached to the software, the features, the experience, and the hardware itself. They actually go out of their way to confirm that what they bought is the best thing that they could have bought. It's called confirmation bias. When you buy something expensive and you want to make sure that you didn't get scammed, you tend to go online and look for reviews that are mainly positive about the thing you bought, just because then you feel less like a fool for spending all that money on something that you love, but you're afraid that maybe it wasn't the best thing you could get. And while that's a stupid behavior, we mostly all do it, and it has the potential to help Linux grow. While more and more Steam Decks ship, more and more users will get used to the amazing features it brings. You have a nice curated store and experience, you have great performance, you have a good user interface with plenty of gaming-specific features that you simply cannot find on any other desktop OS, including Windows. You get performance data out of the box, you get great controller support, you get super sampling technologies, you get compatibility ratings, you get sliders and tweaks to optimize your performance. Basically, you get everything that you would expect from a gaming console and more, and that you just cannot find on Windows. And users will probably expect this kind of experience on their gaming PCs after they use the deck. See, Steam Deck users are mainly PC gamers. They are the people who own games on Steam. And that means that they also have, or had, a gaming PC, which probably ran Windows. And Windows doesn't have that same ease of use that SteamOS provides. Even with the new Steam UI being ported to Windows, they still won't benefit from all the gaming-related features, which are exclusive to SteamOS and GameScope, its compositor. This means that once you've used the Steam Deck, Windows gaming will look like a subpar experience. And this might lead these users to want to use SteamOS on their PCs, or to buy devices that run SteamOS out of the box. The Steam Deck does a lot to get you involved into Steam as a platform. Before the Steam Deck, I could not care less about Steam, my profile, my achievements, curating my games into collections. I just didn't care. Steam was a hindrance to play the games that I actually wanted to play. I did not care about the launcher or the store. Ever since I got the deck, I updated my profile. I triaged all my games into various collections. I tried to get more achievements. I tried to interact more with people on Steam. I just use Steam more and I like it now. Hey, don't judge me. I knew Steam when it was a stupid launcher that made Counter-Strike fail to run 2 times out of 3. And I don't forget easily. I'm basically a Warhammer dwarf. Look, I even have my book of grudges. Ubuntu abandoned Unity. Still not settled. Jokes aside, I won't be alone in getting into the Steam ecosystem. People will get attached to Steam more once they try the deck, and they will want to replicate that experience on a PC. And that's where it's going to be make or break for Valve, and for Linux. Either Valve can foster a good development community around SteamOS, with people helping making it better, faster, more durable, and involving hardware partners to distribute new SteamOS devices. Or they don't manage to do all of that, and the push that the Steam Deck has started will falter immediately. I personally think that it's going to succeed. SteamOS will be open to download for anyone, and other hardware manufacturers have shown interest in making devices with SteamOS out of the box, like 1xPlayer. I wouldn't be surprised if Alienware, Origin PC, Razer, and other manufacturers of gaming hardware would also offer the option to get a PC with SteamOS or Windows. And this will definitely have a ripple effect on the whole Linux desktop, because once manufacturers start to ship devices with SteamOS out of the box, they're gonna want to test their hardware to make sure it works well, which means they're gonna have more traction and more push against GPU and CPU manufacturers to write better drivers, to get their applications of software suites ported to SteamOS. And this means that there's also going to be a push towards application and game developers to make sure that they support SteamOS well. It just benefits the whole Linux desktop. But of course, a gaming PC is still a PC, and people also do non-gaming stuff on these devices. And that's where the desktop mode of SteamOS will come into play. You have a super stable OS, which is read-only, image-based updates, so people should have a pretty great experience in terms of using that as their main PC. They will also have to get to grips with KDE Plasma though, and how it works on SteamOS. This might be a challenge, because KDE doesn't really have a guide or a tour to let you know how it works and what are the differences with other operating systems. Valve probably only included it because they could, and because they knew people would ask for it. The Linux community, myself included, can be pretty vocal sometimes. It's not always a positive conversation, but at least we speak our minds. Valve doesn't really have an interest, at least not business-wise, to make KDE better or easier to understand and use, even if SteamOS grows into a major player. It's a secondary feature for them. The main point is to get Steam into more people's hands, and to get them to buy games. Still, KDE is really easy to use. It's close to the Windows layout, you have an app store to download and install apps from FlatHub, but it's also different and limited at the moment. The app loadout out of the box is scarce. You don't get a calendar, an email client, a screenshot tool, an Office suite, basically anything beyond a web browser and a file manager. This could also be make or break for the SteamOS experience on other devices than the Steam Deck, and it could also be make or break for the Linux desktop as a whole. If users feel like the gaming experience is great, but they don't really like how the desktop mode works, it doesn't do it for them, they're gonna switch back to Windows. The gaming experience itself and the gaming specific features won't be enough to overshadow the things that they cannot do with Plasma. And there's also the mentality shift needed to get non-Steam games running. People using Battle.net, the Epic Games Launcher, Origin, or Ubisoft Connect, they might not understand why they can't just download and install these launchers directly, and why they need third-party tools to get them working. Now fortunately with the Steam Deck we already have tons of guides in video or article formats to let people do just that, so this might not be too complex if people think about looking for all that stuff online. So let's imagine SteamOS does well. People like it, want it on their desktops, laptops, or buy devices with SteamOS pre-installed. How does that benefit the Linux desktop? It clearly benefits Valve and Steam and SteamOS, but how does that help the rest of the distributions? Well, the first part, as I said, is drivers. If manufacturers see that SteamOS is used more and more, and if hardware is being sold in a variety of configurations with SteamOS pre-installed, then there's an incentive to make sure that most stuff works on SteamOS. Not just the GPUs, the CPUs, or the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth chips, but also all the gaming peripherals, all the streaming peripherals, all the microphones, the webcams, the gaming steering wheels, or the joysticks for flight simulators. All of those things will tend to work better on SteamOS, and you know what? A driver for SteamOS is a driver for Linux. Surprising, I know. Then there's software. Developers will want their stuff on SteamOS. From the GPU configuration tools from NVIDIA, AMD, and Intel, the various launchers we already mentioned, which could follow Steam in adding Proton by default and certification methods. There will also be a bigger incentive for developers to make sure their games run well on SteamOS once they release, or even make a native version. There would be more interest from regular app developers to get their stuff running on SteamOS, even if that stuff isn't gaming focused. It would be pretty ironic to end up getting Microsoft Office on Linux and SteamOS just because Valve took away market share from Microsoft. Basically, if SteamOS, a Linux-based operating system, succeeds, it might just make all other Linux distros better in the process. While we as a community argue on which distro is the best and should be pre-installed, Valve could actually be doing something to get Linux in the hands of more people. And that would lead to a complete Linux community collapse, because Arch Linux would become the most ran distro in the world. No more bragging rights, everyone runs Arch, by the way. So, to conclude, the Linux desktop has been growing at a snail's pace, but gaming might just be the final push it needs to get into more hands and become a mainstream option. But there are conditions that will need to be met for that to happen. First, Valve needs to release, update, and market SteamOS 3 as something gamers can actually run anywhere. People need to know it's not limited to the deck and that it's also an option for their current gaming PCs. Second, Valve needs to get hardware manufacturers on board to ship devices with SteamOS pre-installed, so more people can use it in stores, discover it, and decide to buy it. And third, to really benefit the whole Linux community and all distros, SteamOS needs to make sure that desktop mode isn't just a secondary feature, but that it's also a complete desktop that people can actually use every day. This means more work into KDE Plasma, more apps available as Flatpaks, and more work on that format to ensure that it's the best experience for everyone. If this all happens, then yes, gaming will have been the Trojan horse that helps Linux get mainstream. Even if it's SteamOS specifically that succeeds, it doesn't matter, because it's going to benefit all Linux distros. So yes, I do think that gaming alone can make Linux into a more mainstream operating system. But there's a lot that Valve needs to do to make sure that this can happen. What also can happen is you getting a device with Linux pre-installed out of the box. Don't wait for SteamOS 3, just get one right now from today's sponsor. Tuxedo is based in Germany, and they make Linux laptops and desktops, well, at least laptops and desktops with Linux pre-installed. They ship worldwide, they have a huge range of keyboard layouts, and they have an enormous lineup of laptops and desktops that you can configure to your heart's content, from the smallest and most lightweight laptops that are pretty affordable to the biggest gaming desktops or monster gaming laptops that you can buy. They have everything. They just refreshed their Stellaris 15 with Intel 12th Gen CPUs and NVIDIA RTX GPUs. They're a beast of a thing. I reviewed the previous generation, which shares the same chassis, the same awesome keyboard, the same display, and I should get a review you need for the new one, but you can already check them out at the link in the description below and get your own Linux laptop or desktop right now. So thanks everyone for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't hesitate to like, to subscribe, to turn on notifications, and if you didn't like it, you can also dislike and tell me why in the comments. And if you want to support the channel, you can also join my Patreon subscribers or my YouTube members. You'll get access to a weekly Patreon cast and the right to vote on the next topics I'll cover. So thanks everyone for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!